Hi, I'm Hathaway Hester with Chicago Area Archivists, and I'm also Archivist and Digital Preservation Librarian with the National Association of Realtors. Every October, the Chicago Area Archivists sponsor Chicago Open Archives, a month-long event held in conjunction with American Archives Month, where archives across the Chicago area open their doors to the public. As a prelude to Chicago Open Archives, we're talking to archivists across Chicago about their jobs and their collections. Today I'm here with Raquel Flores Clemens, University Archivist and Director of Archives, Records Management, and Special Collections at Chicago State University. Hi, Raquel. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I have a few questions for you about what you collect at Chicago State University. I imagine the history of the university is a big collection.
Yes.
And what are some other collecting areas?
There's a strong focus on the African American experience at the institution because it is a predominantly Black institution. In addition to the large university history and the early history, which really speaks to progressive education, early history of public education, and that then extends throughout the history of the institution through photographs, there is documentation through the newspaper that once was in publication there through the 90s. Our yearbooks, we have a lot of the history of the university, and really that you can see the visual change in the demographic within the yearbooks because that kind of shows the student activities, the student participation. But we also have additional collections that are a part of the Special Collections unit or ARMA department that speaks to the larger history of the communities in which the university inhabited. So Chicago State, formerly Chicago Teachers College, and has a shared history with Northeastern, was formerly in Englewood, and that's actually where the longest history of the institution was. They resided there in Englewood the longest. And so we have collections that kind of reflect the communities. So we have, various photographs. We have one collection that we had that was a university-produced collection. It's the oral history collection. And that was a huge undertaking by at the time, the newly founded history department. It started in the late 60s. And this was it was a great effort to try to document as many community members and residents of the city as a whole, but particularly focusing on the area surrounding the university to try to just document people's experiences in the city and their communities and really to demonstrate the change that was happening in the city as a whole, the change that had already happened that wasn't necessarily reflected in the university's history formally, more evidence to show the need for the university itself to grow in its curriculum and the services that it provided to, at that time, a growing demographic of students that were representing the community in which it inhabited. Englewood transitioned fully at that point to a predominantly Black community, even when it was still a predominantly white institution. And so that oral history kind of, we get a lot of requests for that because it does kind of demonstrate that change. And there's a lot of noted people that are within those records, including Margaret Burroughs, who was the founder of DuSable Museum. She, too, is a Chicago Teachers College alum because she got a teaching certificate there before she went on to the Art Institute. And so she was a interviewee and an interviewer. So we get it, but it's also a lot of prominent people in politics and community service and that sort of thing representing those records that people often request to come view what they had to say about their experiences. We also have the Judge Eugene Pincham collection that's a part of our special collections, and he was a prominent judge and attorney in Chicago from the South Side. He also was a politician in many ways because he also ran for mayor under the Harold Washington Party ticket. He was known as a close colleague and friend of Harold Washington. And I love these type of collections because you just see the love and respect of his family and community had for him because it's such a care that came with this collection. There's this huge collection of photographs and photo books that were put together by his family that kind of really celebrates his life and his professional career. So we have that. We have documents of his of his judgments and his just his writings and thoughts and opinions on various things that was happening in the community, but also in the courtroom. We get interest in his collection, especially around this kind of criminal justice reform, because he was a voice in the courtroom really advocating for people of color and those who were from underrepresented communities and acknowledging the barriers when people from those communities enter the courtroom and some of the injustices that would happen even within, the system within that process. It's great kind of reading through some of his thoughts and his judgments because he was very vocal about like this person is coming from this community, and the way that this happened, their arrest, or the way this happened, there's an injustice there was something wrong there, or even in how that their sentence or whatever will come down, like that's too harsh because this, they're coming from this particular environment, and we have to keep those things in mind. So he really brought this social conscious to his judgment. So I think that's very interesting, and he was someone that was, again, well respected. We also have artifacts from his office. It's like this desk and these 2 chairs and all these plaques and awards and photographs and clippings and things that he collected of other people in the community, but also, connecting with his career and everything. So that's a great collection. And then that also kind of ties in with the other collection that we have, the Illinois Black Legislative Collection. We have the papers of Margaret Smith. We have a chair of hers, too, and the wonderful painting. And then we have all these other, we have a large photo collection just representing all of the Black legislators that have been a part of the Senate and, House of Representatives, and from the first to the, to the most recent. Those are things that just kind of show the impact of African-American people, the impact not only of those communities, but, on the state and beyond. Oh, gosh, I go on and on. But one thing I do want to make sure I mention is we are now residing in the newly named Gwendolyn Brooks Library. Ms. Brooks was bestowed that honor just because she was awesome and she was a phenomenal person and a phenomenal woman and artist. But she also was Distinguished Professor of English at Chicago State. Chicago State University was her academic home for the last 10 years of her life. And so we have, great, photo collection that just documents her time there, her interactions with students, her interaction with faculty. She taught many of her classes with Professor Hakeem Madhubuti, and he was who was responsible for, really bringing her in. He founded the Gwendolyn Brooks Writing Center, which still exists at Chicago State today, and so we have that collection as well. We also have the Black Writers Hall of Fame, which was a part of the Black Writers Conference that existed at the institution for about 20 years and just brought who's who in Black arts and literature and film, and we have that collection. The plaques are hanging outside of the walls of the archive, and so again, that's something that's very unique, to Chicago State, and just speaks to not only those individuals and their love for their craft and when they're in what they did as poets, as artists, but love for their people, because we're talking about, especially with Professor Madhubuti, he's an institution builder. And so I'm very happy to have a representation of Ms. Brooks and what he's done as well in the archive in that way. And we also have the Black Writers Conference, all 20 years of recordings of those events. And so it's so it's a pretty massive collection. We also, Chicago State was the first institution to have an ARS system, the automatic retrieval system, so, high density storage. And so that collection just is, between VHS, SVHS, and mini DV tapes, and it takes up about 3 bins. And those are pretty big bins if you're familiar with the ARS system. So it's a lot. And so I'm currently about to work with a vendor to get those digitized, because I'm hoping to at least debut the digitized recordings on, just let the world know, we have them. And if you can't come to the archives to see them, we have them available in digital format. And so I'm hoping to debut that by the time of the naming ceremony, and that will happen on October 18th.
And that reminds me, that ties into some activities you have planned for Chicago Open Archives.
Yes. So we definitely will have an open house. Still working out the logistics of that, but it will be during the week of the naming ceremony, if not on the day of, early in the day. And we would certainly have exhibits in the archive as well as in the rotunda on campus that's in the Student Union building. And I usually try to put something up for special events or special commemorations. We'll be having up some exhibits in the Rotunda for Latino Heritage Month, but also for Archives Month. I am in the process of confirming panels that we'll be having in the month of October. It'll be either during that week or towards the end of the month. One of the panel discussions will be between 2 very important organizations that really fought for rights and did good work for both Black and brown people. And so hopefully, I can let the world know soon. I'm just waiting for, confirmation on dates.
I look forward to hearing more.
Yeah, for sure.
If people want to come see anything at your archives, any of the exhibits, or even just visit the archives in general, can they just walk in?
The week of October 15th is when we can, welcome the public in, and you could just come. We do encourage appointments simply because I am a lone archivist. I'm a lone arranger. Although there is a records coordinator, and he supports me on so many projects. Shout out to Brandon Rupel, the records coordinator at Chicago State. But because it's, just a very small department, we go into a meeting, there's no, it's just, it's just us, so that we have to maybe close for like an hour or so. So we do encourage people to call. But with that being said, it's a public, institution. It's a public archive. So, we welcome not only the student population, but we also serve the public. And quite frankly, most of our visitors are researchers from other organizations, other institutions. It's giving all the the whole list.
I have heard so much already.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, being in the university setting, what the relationship is like between the students and the archives and the faculty.
Yeah. It's interesting. For overall, the institution supports not only the archive and understand what it means and what it stands for, and the importance of having, an archive. When I usually interface with students, they're usually kind of surprised at like all the wealth of information and materials that we have, because most students, they know the library, but unless like the faculty directs them to the archive to do a paper or, engage in primary source research, they really don't know about the archive. So my goal, I feel like I'm like a brand rep or something. Like I go out there with flyers and like passing them out, like, come to the archive, because students a lot of times don't know about the archives. But once they do know and they come into the space, they're usually pretty like, oh wow, I'm going to come back, and a lot of times we do get students just to come back like, oh, what are you all doing today? And, most of the interaction does come from my program. I am a believer in activating the archive, really finding something in the archive that will connect with people, connect with current events, making history relevant. And, I tend to do a lot of programs and exhibits, not only to promote the archive and the collections, but to really promote the narrative and the positive narratives that exist in that institution, which is very needed right now because of the hit that institution has taken from the budget impasse and so many other things.
So much of our work as archivists is that engagement with whoever our communities may be, whether it's students or in a corporate environment, even letting the staff know that we exist, what we do, why archives are important.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you have come up with a lot of great events.
I do what I can.
and you'll have more in October.
Yeah.
So that's really in keeping with the whole spirit of Chicago Open Archives, is to really get that word out about why archives matter, why history matters.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome.
I look forward to your Chicago Open Archives events.
Yeah.
I look forward to visiting the library and archives.
Yes, please do.
And again, it was a pleasure speaking with you today, Raquel.
Yes, thank you. This was great.
Thank you for listening to the Chicago Area Archivists COA podcast. We would like to thank Chicago Area Archivists, Chicago Open Archives Planning Committee, engineer Allison Shine Holmes, and WFMT for their time and effort.